In the early stages of love, we are intoxicated not only by the physical form of the other, but by the mystery they represent. The unknown is alluring, it draws forth our curiosity, our fantasies, our longing. But as the relationship deepens and time stretches on, this mystery begins to dissolve. We trade fascination for function, novelty for necessity. The partner who once embodied magic becomes known, and in becoming known, they become ordinary. But this ordinariness is deceptive. It is not that our partner has become less mysterious, rather it is that we have stopped looking through the eyes of wonder. Familiarity acts as a veil, it casting a shadow across the psyche. It tells us we have seen all there is to see. But this is the great illusion. The soul of the other remains vast, undiscovered, layered. What has changed is not their depth, but our gaze. In Jungian terms, the relationship has fallen into a static state, where archetypal energies no longer move freely. The animating fire of Eros is not gone, it is repressed beneath layers of routine, responsibility, and unconscious assumptions. In psychological language, this is the shadow of domesticity, everything that has been pushed aside in favor of stability. Passion, risk, fantasy, these are sacrificed to the altar of predictability. Yet the shadow does not disappear, it accumulates in the unconscious, growing in power, yearning to be acknowledged. Often it shows itself in dreams, in sudden irritations, in secret cravings or imagined lives. This is the psyche's way of saying you have forgotten the other is a mystery, and so you have forgotten yourself. To reignite sexual desire, one must confront the shadow of familiarity, not by rejecting stability, but by honoring what has been exiled from it. One must be willing to see the partner not as a role, wife, husband, co-parent, roommate, but as an unfolding presence, unknowable in their totality. The true erotic spark arises not from what is known, but from what is glimpsed, hinted at, half seen in the depths. Within each of us dwells the archetype of the lover, not merely the one who seeks pleasure, but the one who longs, aches, imagines, and creates beauty through connection. This lover is not tied to mere physical impulse. It is a force of psychic vitality, a deep current that moves through the soul, linking us to the eternal themes of passion, devotion, ecstasy, and surrender. When awakened, it calls forth its counterpart, the beloved, not as an individual alone, but as a living symbol of the divine other. At the beginning of romantic connection, these archetypes are effortlessly activated. We do not just see a person, we see a vision, a portal into something greater than ourselves. The lover within us comes alive, awakening desires that feel transcendent, even sacred. The beloved becomes an object of reverence, glowing with qualities that stir something ancient and mythic. In this enchanted space we are no longer two separate selves. We become part of a shared myth, a sacred drama of union. Yet in long-term relationships, these archetypal forces often go dormant. Life constrains us to the practical, the scheduled, the known. The lover, if not nourished, retreats into the unconscious, becoming silent or restless. The beloved, stripped of symbolic presence, is reduced to the familiar figure across the table. The magic dissolves not because it was false, but because it has not been sustained. To reawaken erotic desire, one must summon the archetypal lover once again, through imagination, art, beauty, and inner fire. This is not an external effort alone, but an inner transformation, a willingness to feel, to risk, to see with symbolic vision. When the lover stirs, the beloved responds, for they are not truly separate. Each calls the other into being. The beloved is not merely the partner as they appear, but the image of soul made visible in them, the part that touches the infinite, the unknowable, the otherworldly. This kind of seeing requires a different form of attention, not the attention that checks off tasks or scans for faults, but one that gazes through the veil, that recognizes the archetypal in the ordinary. A touch becomes a poem, a glance becomes a threshold, and the everyday body of the partner becomes a vessel of meaning. When we evoke the lover in ourselves, we simultaneously awaken the beloved in the other. Eroticism is often mistaken for something purely physical, a set of acts, sensations, or chemical reactions. But beneath this surface lies something far more potent, the movement of psychological energy, of libido, flowing between two people. In the language of depth psychology, libido is not confined to sexuality alone, it is the animating force of the psyche itself, the source of creativity, vitality, and transformation. When this energy is alive in the relational field, it manifests as desire, attraction, even sacred longing. When it stagnates, the relationship feels dull, lifeless, or merely functional. In the early stages of connection, erotic energy flows effortlessly. Tension is high, polarity is strong, and the unknown creates a natural distance that excites the imagination. This space, the gap between self and other, is essential to desire. It allows for longing, for projection, for the dance of approach and retreat that gives Eros its pulse. It is the very impossibility of full possession that keeps the energy alive. The moment we believe we fully have the other, the erotic charge begins to dissolve. In long-term relationships, closeness often becomes over-familiarity. The psychological boundaries blur, and the necessary distance collapses under the weight of shared routines, obligations, and unspoken assumptions. While intimacy deepens, the erotic charge may fade, not because love has diminished, but because the psychic polarity has flattened. The partner becomes, in a sense, an extension of the self, and desire cannot exist where otherness has disappeared. To revive erotic energy, one must work with the dynamics of tension and separation, not by creating artificial conflict, but by reclaiming space for the unknown. The psyche craves polarity, masculine and feminine energies, giver and receiver, pursuer and pursued. These opposites generate the field in which desire can spark. When both partners are submerged in sameness, there is no arc across which libido can move. The erotic requires friction, not in the sense of strife, but in the sense of energetic difference. This movement of energy is not mechanical, but symbolic. A whispered word can carry more charge than a physical act. A withheld touch, a delayed kiss, a gaze held just long enough to stir the unconscious. These subtle gestures become conduits for the erotic current. The key is not quantity, but depth. Libido seeks meaning, not repetition. It wants to be moved, to be stirred, to be unsettled just enough to remind us that we are alive. In the beginning of love, we do not see the other as they truly are. We see them as a mirror of our deepest desires, our forgotten parts, our idealized image of union. This act is known in depth psychology as projectioning, the unconscious transfer of inner material onto another. The beloved becomes luminous not because of who they are, but because of what we place upon them. They carry the energy of the anima or animus, the soul, image of the opposite within us, and in that moment, the world is enchanted. But projection is by nature temporary. As time passes, the illusions fall away. The partner ceases to be a vessel of fantasy and becomes instead a real and perfect human being. This unveiling is necessary for mature love, why it often coincides with a collapse of desire, for it was precisely the mystery, the unknown, that ignited the fire of longing. When we believe we know, the other completely, Eros retreats. The sacred distance that sustained the erotic charge has vanished. Yet projection is not the enemy. It is the beginning. The key lies not in clinging to illusion, but in learning to reproject consciously. This is not self-deception, but creative seeing. Just as an artist sees a landscape, not merely as land, but as symbol, we must begin to look again at our partner not only as they appear in the day-to-day, but as a living embodiment of something deeper. This requires a shift in perception, from literal to symbolic, from functional to mythic. To reclaim the mystery of the other, one must first reclaim the imagination. Fantasy must be reawakened, not fantasy in the sense of escape, but as a sacred function of the psyche. The imagination allows us to see within our eyes, to glimpse the hidden depths in the familiar. A partner's gesture, a long taken for granted, may suddenly appear luminous. A silence between two people, once empty, becomes charged with possibility. This is the return of mystery, not from the outside, but from within. Projection, in its conscious form, becomes reverence. We choose to see the other not merely through the lens of history or habit, but as a mystery still unfolding. In this act, we restore the polarity necessary for desire. We make space for the sacred other to re-emerge, not as fantasy alone, but as a real presence layered with unknowns, contradictions, and soul. When sexual desire fades in a long-term relationship, it is tempting to view the problem as interpersonal, a loss between two people, a failure of communication, attraction, or novelty. But more often, this quiet erosion of passion signals something deeper, a stagnation within the individual psyche. Eros does not thrive in still water. It feeds on movement, transformation, and the continual unfolding of the self. When one or both partners have ceased to grow inwardly, the erotic bond begins to wither, not from lack of love, but from lack of becoming. At the heart of Jungian psychology is the process of individuation, the lifelong unfolding of the self toward wholeness. This journey is not linear or predictable. It involves descent into the unconscious, confrontation with the shadow, integration of opposites, and the slow emergence of the authentic soul. A person engaged in this inner work radiates a certain magnetism, not through charm or perfection, but through aliveness. They are in touch with the deeper layers of the psyche, and that depth becomes erotic. When a partner embarks on their individuation, they become less graspable, less static. They surprise, contradict, transform. They no longer relate to the other solely through familiar roles but through presence, through essence. This unpredictability reawakens desire because it reintroduces mystery. The relationship is no longer a closed system but a dynamic container where both souls are in motion. Eros is drawn not to sameness but to vitality. When we engage in creative acts, when we pursue what animates us, when we face our own darkness and bring it into the light, we become more fully ourselves. And in doing so, we become more available to true intimacy. The erotic charge does not only come from physical novelty, it emerges when two evolving psyches meet, not as fixed identities, but as unfolding beings. Inner work demands solitude, reflection, courage. It often requires withdrawal before reconnection, a temporary retreat from the relationship in order to rediscover one's own center. But it is from this center that true desire arises, not the need to possess, but the longing to meet another from a place of fullness. In this way, individuation is not a threat to love, but its deepest source. The modern psyche suffers from a great split between the sacred and the ordinary, between ritual and routine, between soul and schedule. Over time, relationships too fall under this spell of division. The daily grind becomes a hypnotic rhythm, and the once luminous bond between lovers is dulled by repetition. We forget that the sacred does not only live in temples or peak experiences. It hides, most often in the everyday, disguised in plain forms waiting to be seen with symbolic sight. Desire, at its core, is an invitation to perceive differently. It is the soul's way of saying, there is more here than meets the eye. To reignite sexual energy in a long-term relationship, one must learn to reawaken the sacred dimension of the ordinary. This is not about artificial excitement or dramatic gestures, it is about the quality of attention. When attention becomes reverent, even the simplest act, a shared meal, a casual touch, a lingering glance, becomes a ritual of intimacy. The sitch is nourished by symbols, not tasks. A kiss, when infused with presence, becomes an offering. A shared silence becomes a vessel that holds something greater than words. These are not performances but portals, small thresholds through which Eros can re-enter. The mistake is to think that eroticism demands novelty. In truth, it demands depth, a way of seeing that penetrates the surface and touches essence. Ritual can be reintroduced not through rigidity but through rhythm, a consistent gesture, lighting a candle before making love, holding eye contact in silence for a few moments each day, greeting one another with intention. These are small but potent acts that reweave the soul back into the relationship. They signal to the unconscious that this bond is not merely functional, but sacred. To live erotically is to live symbolically. It is to recognize that the body is not separate from spirit, that pleasure is not trivial, that desire is a form of knowing. When we attune ourselves to this layer of reality, the partner once seen as familiar is revealed again as an archetype, a symbol, a living embodiment of something numinous. The bed becomes an altar, the home a sanctuary, and the relational space a vessel for transformation.